Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do here, I cover true crime cases, and all of the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older. So if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click that subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So today, for our second case of Oldies October, we are diving into a murder case that I've wanted to cover for a couple years now. I was in Louisville, Kentucky about 2 years ago when I came across a book covering this case, which is Louisville's Alma Kellner Mystery. It is by Shawn M. Herron. I have it right here. There is a lot of information in this video that comes from this book alone, but also I wanted to give a shout out to Vintage True Crime Stories, an illustrated anthology of forgotten cases of murder and mayhem, Volume 1. It is presented by historical crime detective, and this covers the case, but not as in detail as this book right here. But I just wanted to give both books a shout out. Although this murder case occurred over a century ago, it is still referred to as one of Kentucky's most brutal murders. With all that being said, let's get right into it. Alma Catherine Kellner was born in the year 1901 in Louisville, Kentucky to parents Frederick Frank Kellner and Florence Gertrude Weitzel Kellner, who had married in 1899. Alma had two siblings, Minnie Weitzel Kellner and Frederick Jr. Kellner. Minnie was a year older, born in 1900, and Frederick Jr. was born in 1906, so he was only a toddler when this case took place. A third sibling of hers had been born in 1902, but unfortunately passed at infancy and is simply referred to as Infant Kellner. A large part of the reason that her case gained so much publicity was due to the social prominence and wealth of her family. Her father was a high-degree Mason and worked alongside his cousin, Frank Fair, for Frank's company, Frank Fair Brewing. Alma's grandfather was also J.K. Kellner, who was the president of the Central Consumers Company. Frank Fair Brewing was a part of the larger Central Consumers Company. So the family was well known in the area of Louisville. The Kellner family, who were German immigrants, were extremely devoted to their Roman Catholic faith, almost never missing Mass. The chilly morning of Wednesday, December 8th of 1909 being no different when it came to that. Alma Kellner was 8 years old at this time and was in 3rd grade at Sisters of Mercy Academy. She was helped by her maternal aunt, Elizabeth Weitzel, into her church clothes this morning. She was wearing a plaid dress of tan and green colors that had little pearl buttons on it. It had a little bit of a lower neckline, so she wore a white gamp under it, which is a high-necked blouse. She had on black knit stockings, tan gloves, and black shoes. She also put on her dark red mushroom-shaped hat. This style of hat was very popular during this time period, and over her outfit she wore her black and white checkered coat that had a velvet collar and emblems on the sleeves. Alma's family usually attended Mass at St. Boniface's Catholic Church, but on this day, Alma was going to be attending Mass, the High Mass celebrating the Feast of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, at St. John's Roman Catholic Church, a church located about 0.8 miles from her home. It goes under the full name now of St. John United Church of Christ and still sits at 637 East Market Street. The blocks were short, and if you walked 2 blocks up from the Kellner home at 507 East Broadway and looked down the street, you could see the top of the church. She had been to this church the previous Sunday with a friend of hers, so it was not her first time attending Mass at this church. Based on Google Maps, the walk would take a person roughly 18 minutes, possibly a little longer for her since she was a child with, of course, shorter legs. She left her home that morning at 9:45 a.m. thinking that Mass was at 10. She left by herself due to the fact that both her aunt and her mother had already attended Mass that morning, and I'm pretty sure they attended Mass at their usual church. She played a little bit with her younger brother and then kissed her mother goodbye. Her mother told her to return immediately after Mass concluded for the morning, but little Alma Kellner would never return home that day. Multiple people had seen Alma that morning making her way to church. This included Dr. W.B.C. Yount, who owned a local drugstore and saw her walk by and wave. Also a postman named William Augustus, who she also waved to as she walked by. Now, if Mass ended at 11, like they thought, she would have been home a little bit before 11:30 a.m. By 11:30 a.m., Alma's mother was starting to wonder where her daughter was because she should have been home by then. The family started to think that possibly she headed to a friend's home after the service, But as hours ticked by, Alma's mother knew something was terribly wrong. This was unlike Alma to not come home first and then let her know if she wanted to go elsewhere. She would not have left her mother and the rest of her family wondering where she was. After a little bit of time passed, Florence called her husband, who was working that morning at the family's company, to let him know that their daughter was missing. He immediately came home and the family began searching the area for Alma with the help of any friends. The rector of the church Alma was heading to that morning, Father George Schumann, was contacted, and he immediately informed her family that Mass that morning was not held at 10. It had been at 9. She missed it. So even if she made it to the church, she wouldn't have spent over an hour at it anyway because she would have arrived when it was ending. He told them that he had not seen their daughter there that morning at all. They thought that possibly Alma arrived at St. John's, realized Mass was over, and headed to another church in the area for Mass. So they began contacting other Catholic churches in the neighborhood. No one had seen her. Like her father would say in the next morning's paper, Alma knew her way home, and if she had gotten lost, she would have went to someone she possibly knew and trusted, told them her family name and address, and hopefully they would have helped her home. After hours of searching and no luck finding the child, the Kellner family contacted the 2nd Police District of the Louisville Police Department. Night Chief Captain F.P. Portman immediately spread the news to officers in the area of Louisville. Officers went out to the streets of Louisville that night and were commanded to question any child they came across and arrest anyone who fell under suspicion. Alma's classmates were also questioned, and none of them said they had seen her since school on Tuesday. Her family and police officers thought that maybe she got hurt along the way to church. Maybe she went to a hospital. Hospitals were checked. No one had seen a child fitting her description. Drugstores and local doctors were also questioned to see if they had treated her for any injuries. Still, nothing. This was a pretty tight-knit community, and no one was really saying that they had seen the girl yet. Due to how wealthy the Kellner family was, they started thinking that possibly someone in the area had targeted them and took Alma, that this person who took her would probably leave a ransom note for the family wanting money in exchange for the child. According to the New York Times, there had been 2 ransom notes in total. The first asking for $30,000 from Frank Fair, and the second asking for $5,000 from the family directly. Both of these were determined quickly by authorities to be hoaxes. Her loved ones posted a $5,000 reward for anyone who came forward with information that led to her discovery. $5,000 in 1909 is roughly $169,000 today. This was a good chunk of change, and they felt like someone with promising details surrounding her disappearance would come forward. People would come forward, but when it came to promising information, no one really came forward. We know that Father Schumann stated that he had not seen Alma that morning at St. John's, but had anyone else seen her there? Well, according to 2 young girls, they had. There were also 2 women that later came forward saying they saw a girl kneeling at the altar who looked a lot like Alma. As the case would progress, it is believed that these individuals who supposedly saw her at St. John's that morning did in fact see Alma. It is believed that she got to the church, realized that Mass was over, and then decided to simply pray by herself. The Kellner home was put under strict watch by officials. Alma's cousin Frank would become the main spokesman for anything the Kellner family wanted to release to the public. By the day after the disappearance, Thursday, Chief of Detectives John P. Carney was the main man put on the case. Thursday night, Chief of Police H. Watson Lindsay would inform reporters that they had done a thorough search of the church and the Kellner home, also letting them know that they questioned anyone in the family, anyone living in the home, anyone of close relation to the family, anyone working at any of the stores in the area, anyone working at the hospitals and schools, anyone that they could think of, and that everyone seemed to check out so far. Everyone seemed to have given authorities strong alibis. Police officers were also questioned, and it didn't seem like any of them had any involvement in her disappearance either. In the days after her disappearance, there would also be multiple people coming forward claiming they saw Alma in different locations. This included one claiming they saw her near the railroad crossing, one claiming they saw a girl in a red hat being pushed into a yellow wagon by 2 women, and one claiming they saw a girl fitting her description, looking lost and asking for directions to Clay and Caldwell Streets. There would also be a supposed sighting of a girl in a wagon with a couple, and the couple were asking how to get to Cincinnati. And also there was a sighting of a wagon as well, where a peddler spotted a young girl in a wagon that fit Alma's description. There were a few of these supposed sightings of Alma involving wagons, and they did end up thinking that the last two I mentioned may have been connected, but as we would find out, they couldn't have been Alma, and neither could the other ones. It is also said, to add to the mystery of her vanishing, that a woman in all black, including a black veil, basically mourning attire for a funeral, was seen around the area in different locations. There was simply an eerie energy surrounding Louisville at this time. It was cold and dreary and tensions were high. There had been cases of missing children in the area before, but nothing to this magnitude. Not a day went by where anyone truly felt any peace. There was still the lingering questions of what happened to Alma Kellner, where is she, whether alive or dead, and who among us was responsible. Months and months would pass with little updates in the case. Her family was absolutely grief-stricken. Her mother wishing that she had only just walked with her daughter that morning to church, but of course she had no idea what was going to happen. Eventually though, almost as if some higher force was responsible, an event would happen that would ultimately answer some of those lingering questions that the community had. That event was the flooding of the groundwater in the cellar of the schoolhouse connected to St. John's Church. Above the cellar was the music room used by the Society of Congregation, and the ladies, a part of this group, notified Father Schumann that the room was becoming very damp. He actually had no knowledge of a room below the meeting room because the only entrance to it was through a trap door in the center of the room, and this trap door had been covered by carpet. This room below the meeting room was a cellar that had not been entered in a very long time, and it was half flooded with water. This was going to be a big job, so he called in a plumber. This plumber's name was Richard Sweet. On May 30th of 1910, which was nearly 6 months after Alma's disappearance, Richard was sent to pump out the water from the cellar. For anyone possibly confused, because I sure was, there was a large area below the church and parochial school next door, all part of St. John's Church. Father Schumann knew about the area below the church, but not the section of it that was below the schoolhouse. Richard got most of the water out of the cellar, and when there was only a little bit left, some of the muddy water, he decided to use a shovel to get the rest out. So he started shoveling. About half a foot into the mud in the corner of the cellar, he started smelling a horrendous smell. It smelled like death. He described it as a fearful odor. He kept digging. Eventually, he hit something. It was a carpet. He pulled out the carpet from the mud, and he found a tiny black shoe sticking out from inside of it. Then, in the carpet, he discovered a skeleton, the badly decomposed, scorched, and butchered remains of Alma Kellner. He rushed out of the cellar and informed a passerby of his findings. From there, he ran to a nearby store and phoned the 1st District of the Louisville Police Department. Chief Watson and Captain Carney swiftly made their way to the scene. Deputy Kammerer was the one to place the rolled up remains in a basket to bring to the surface so it could be further examined. It would be examined at a local undertaker's office due to the city at the time having no official morgue or location to perform an autopsy. It took 5 hours to slowly and delicately clean her skeleton. In the end, Coroner Duncan would announce that it was discovered that Alma's skeletal remains were not complete. She was missing quite a few bones, which included her right foot and the top and left part of her skull. None of the clothing was present besides remnants of her stockings and left shoe. It was determined that many of her bones had been broken. This included her right leg around the shin area and all of her ribs on her right side. Of course, her skull was missing parts of it, so it was broken as well, believed to have been crushed. Deputy Coroner Kammerer went back to the location to search some more. He had help from others as well, including Chief Lindsay and Frank Fair. While searching inside the sanctuary, He was looking at the walls for blood and markings, and he came across a closet. In the closet, he found an undershirt that had been rolled up and stuffed into the corner. It had red spots on it, believed to be blood. An employee of the city named Richard Height was searching around the cellar the next morning, close to around 11 a.m., with a ton of other people, and he was looking through a pile of ash from burned coal, and it is said that he threw some of the larger stone remnants of the coal to the side, and when he did this, in the ash, he found a little foot. He didn't know what it was at the time and brought it up into the light outside, showing a street cleaner, and then Deputy Coroner Kammerer. Kammerer called for Dr. Duncan and Frank, who were inside, and Duncan verified it was in fact a human foot. It was Alma's foot. They would later compare the partial shoe on this foot to the other shoe on the skeleton, and they matched. The rest of the ash was sifted through to make sure they collected anything else. Under the trap door from the sacristy, they would also locate other items, including a glove, a handkerchief, a feather, and a pearl bead. Chief Lindsay at this time would tell reporters that Alma's body was located and that it was in fact a homicide, one that they will now be investigating. He stated that he believed that Alma was taken by someone to the basement of the church, that she had been murdered and dismembered to prepare her body for burning, and that they tried to do it limb by limb. That something had happened and the person left her there for some time and then resulted in using quicklime to complete his task. Possibly this person came to the conclusion that bringing the body to the furnace, body part by body part, was going to take too long, and someone may have discovered what they were doing by the time they finished the job. Then the person responsible simply left her body in a part of the cellar where they thought that no one would ever find her, or at least not for a long time. Due to the state that her remains were in, it was undetermined exactly how she had been murdered. They verified that these remains were in fact Alma's thanks to her dentist after comparing her dental chart to the teeth in the skull of the girl's skeleton. Also, the glove and handkerchief were verified by her family as being hers. It was also believed that the bead had come from her clothing. As for the feather, it was unknown. The smidge of hope that her family possessed in regards to thinking possibly Alma was alive somewhere and being held captive was gone now. It was no longer a missing persons case. It was a case of murder, and a horrific one at that. Suspicion started falling on one individual at this time almost immediately. Father Schumann recalled that on the day that Alma went missing, he had smelled something burning. He asked the church janitor about it. The church's janitor was named Joseph Wendling, and he told Father Schumann that he had simply been burning old rags down in the furnace. Father Schumann thought nothing of it at the time, but after they discovered that Alma had been burned, or part of her body had, he let authorities know of this incident. Joseph Wendling, 27 at the time, had been working for the church for about 20 days at the time of Alma's disappearance, and he himself had vanished on January 14th. Of 1910, coincidentally the day that Frank Fair reached out to Father Schumann again regarding Alma's disappearance. When authorities did their original search of St. John's property, it was Joseph Wendling who led them around to conduct their search. But he left out the area of the cellar where Richard Sweet would eventually locate Alma Kellner's body. Joseph lived with his wife, Lena, 42, who was the housekeeper for Father Schumann. The married couple lived in 2 rooms at the rear of the 2nd floor of the rectory. Lena was taken in for intense questioning, and she stated that she had married Joseph in California and they came to Louisville because her brother lived there. She said that she did not report him missing because she was not too surprised by him leaving. He wasn't one to, I guess, stick to his duties. He was not one to fully commit to really anything he did in life. For instance, he had previously left the French military. During questioning, it really seemed like Lena was taking up for her husband, despite him completely leaving her. She kept going on about how nice he was to her and how well he treated her. She even insisted when she was speaking to authorities that she had absolutely no photos of her husband anywhere, but they would find out that this was completely false when they searched where they lived and found photos of him, specifically his military photo. This photo of him in the French military was the main one that they really went off of when they were searching for him. More damaging information would be uncovered about Joseph. Joseph had actually been arrested on May 18th of 1909 for detaining a child in Highland Park, a neighborhood in Louisville. The little girl stated that she was detained by him and he became very inappropriate with her. This was said to be verbal, not physical, but of course it could have progressed to that. While in court for this case, the girl took the witness stand and she couldn't finish her testimony because she had an epileptic spell, and unfortunately, he was let off with only a very small fine. Joseph's defense stated that Joseph had only been in the country for about 2 years. He was originally from France, and his English was not very good. So the girl must have taken what he said as being improper when he was only simply trying to be friendly. It was also discovered that Joseph had recently been fired from a hotel after being a peeping Tom and watching female guests. Due to all of this information, Coroner Duncan on June 5th returned the verdict that Alma Kellner had died at the hands of Joseph Wendling. Now, they just needed to find him. Like I said before, he had been missing since January 14th. I also wanted to mention that it was said that he had went missing on January 14th, but there was somebody that came forward that said that they saw him in the area in February. So it was believed that he possibly came back and met up with his wife in some way, and that she lied to authorities and said that she hadn't seen him since January 14th, but possibly saw him in February. It is unknown though if this had actually been him in February or not. A manhunt ensued. While trying to locate him, they would also find bloody clothing in his room. When I say that this was one of the most insane searches for a wanted man I have ever come across, I mean it. Captain John P. Carney, commander of the 5th District, was put in charge of the Detective Bureau, and there was a lot of pressure put on him to locate Joseph Wendling, a man who over time would have information coming in about him, claiming that he hopped a boat back to France. So at that point in the case, French officials were also notified about what was going on. This case became a case that spread worldwide. It wasn't just nationwide. Captain Carney, after speaking to an expert criminologist, felt like his best bet was to get a copy of Joseph's handwriting and signature, which he did. And this would be what he would use to compare to the signatures done by men fitting Joseph's description who checked into different places around the country because they were receiving word from hotels that Joseph had been staying there. The thing is though that Captain Carney would get the news that Joseph may be in this place or that place, and when he arrived there with backup, Joseph had already left. This went on for weeks and weeks. Over 14,000 miles would be traveled and hundreds of hours of time spent trying to piece together all the information they had at hand and figure out where Joseph Wendling was hiding. They would also determine that at this time, they were spending about $100 a day trying to locate him. Joseph Wendling was using multiple aliases, but it was the handwriting that made them sure it was him. Carney would gather up signatures from different hotel check-in books, from payrolls from different companies he worked for, and postcards he had sent to many different women he met along his journey away from Kentucky. All different names, but same style of writing. They would eventually track him down though. On July 30th of 1910, Joseph Wendling was dragged out from under a sink in the washroom of a boarding house he had been staying at by San Francisco detectives Thomas P. Burke and George H. Ryan, who received word of him boarding there. Captain Carney was on a train a few miles outside of San Francisco when he learned of the arrest and was eager to come face to face with the man he had been searching for this entire time. Joseph Wendling did not deny his identity, although he had been going under a different one at the time. He had been using the name Henry Jacquemin. With this name, he met a woman named Cora Munya. They had actually been engaged, but she went back to Missouri and claimed that Joseph frightened her. Cora would actually be the one to end up learning of Joseph's real identity and that he was wanted, and she would be the one feeding Captain Carney the information that ultimately led officials to where he was. Joseph knew who Captain Carney was as soon as he saw him. He, though, claimed that he wasn't hiding, that he simply left Louisville and changed his name to get away from his wife, who spent too much of their money, that he only learned of being a wanted man 3 weeks earlier. He was asked immediately about the bloody clothing, and he said that he had accidentally shot himself in his hand with a revolver, and there had been a lot of blood. Joseph stated that he and Father Schumann had done a search of the church, and they never searched the location where she was. He quickly realized how he had worded that, and he went on to say that they couldn't have looked there or else they would have found her. The journey back to Louisville by train was a long one with some stops along the way. During these stops, Joseph was put into local jails for the night. He was being transported by Captain Carney with the help from Chief Lindsay. The two main stops along the way were Denver, Colorado and St. Louis, Missouri. The ride to Louisville, it was not a calm one. There was a lot of questioning of Joseph, and Joseph would answer some questions, but there was a lot of screaming from him, crying, and nearly breaking away to escape the train on multiple occasions. He complained a lot about the way that he was treated, even though they stated that they did make sure he was protected, fed, and given water. Chief Lindsay, while they were stopped in St. Louis, went on to Louisville to prepare for Joseph's arrival. They knew that there were going to be angry mobs of people waiting for him. The public was not told when he would be arriving, so people were just kind of waiting. And if you know anything about crimes that took place during this time, the New York Times would at one time even report that Kentucky was one of the worst states for lynching of people that were being suspected of horrible crime. Mobs of people would break into jails and go lynch the people themselves. They did not care to wait for a trial. If furious members of society thought you to be guilty, a lot of the time they would try anything to get to you and take things into their own hands. I actually remember reading about a case where a man was suspected of murder and he was being transported down the Ohio River by boat by officers, and a mob ended up taking over another boat on the river and chasing the boat down with the prisoner on it. That is what they were nervous about when it came to Joseph and him arriving back in Louisville. When he did arrive, he was actually surprisingly cheerful. He basically considered himself a celebrity. He never looked upset or had his head down in remorse. He was always just waving and all smiles. Although he left his wife behind, cheated on her with other women, and cheated so severely that he was actually engaged to another woman and was suspected of murdering a little girl, she still took his side. In an effort to raise funds so they could pay for everything that they needed to pay for legally, she started selling photos of her husband at a Labor Day celebration, but members of the committee in charge of the celebration told her it was not appropriate to do so and basically shut that down. The pretrial was held at Jefferson County Courthouse, and during this, they did have 2 local physicians take the stand claiming they did actually treat Joseph Wendling for an injury to his hand in January of 1910 that he claimed had come from the gunshot. The official trial began on November 28th of that year with hundreds upon hundreds of locals surrounding the courthouse. Joseph Wendling pled not guilty. Family members, any person who saw Alma that morning on her way to church, and anyone who had any involvement in any way took the stand to recall what they remembered. Father Schumann took the stand and answered any questions in regards to his ex-employee. This included any discussions they had that day of Alma's disappearance. He stated that Joseph told him he had not seen the missing girl that morning at church. Father Schumann was also asked about Joseph's duties as a janitor at the church, which included keeping the furnace going, considering how cold it was during this time in December. So Joseph was in charge of the furnace, and we know that some of Alma's body parts had been burned. Joseph was quoted saying, "I either killed the girl or I didn't. They should either send me to the electric chair or turn me free." On December 3rd of 1910 at 10:10 p.m., the Jefferson County jurors reached a conclusion. The verdict was read and Joseph Wendling was found guilty. Alma's loved ones were thrilled, but saddened when it was announced that he was not sentenced to death. 7 jurors voted for a conviction and the death penalty, but the other 5 wanted an acquittal. During the short break for dinner, one of the jurors went over the facts again, and when everyone met after dinner, they all talked it over, and they came to a unanimous decision of a conviction and life imprisonment based on the fact that all evidence was basically circumstantial. Joseph would file an appeal, but this appeal was eventually overturned. Joseph was sent to the state prison in Frankfort, Kentucky, and he was basically a model prisoner for most of his time there until he escaped in 1919 on August 22nd. On August 26th, newspapers would report that he was located. It was discovered that he had primarily been hiding in the attic of the old Capitol. A couple of women did say that they had given him breakfast, and other locals had seen him but didn't know his true identity at the time. He was caught due to the fact that he was peeping through a young girl's window. When the girl realized that a man was looking through her window late at night, she ran and let her father know that a strange man was peering through the window of her room. Her father fired his pistol at him, but the man ran off, and a patrolman who recognized Joseph pretty much immediately stopped him as he was running into an alley. Joseph at this time had a revolver and a knife, but the patrolman hit him over the head with his club, and Joseph was then taken back to prison. He was indicted for the escape, and since he was already serving life in prison, they ended up lessening a lot of his prison privileges. Those privileges included jobs at the prison that originally became the reason he escaped, because he was using a ladder on one of his jobs, and when a guard had his back turned, Joseph put the ladder out the window, climbed down it, and left. That's how he escaped. In February of 1921, Joseph attempted to flee the prison again, this time with a rope scaling the walls of the prison. At the time, he was actually dressed in a pink kimono, and because of this, people started speculating if possibly Joseph had been the mysterious woman dressed in black seen around Louisville after Alma's disappearance and before she was found. After this incident, a judge decided that he needed to be sent to a state prison in Eddyville where the walls were much higher. Joseph would seek parole while at Eddyville and even wrote to True Detective magazine, claiming that he was an innocent man in the case that he was being punished for. The magazine would end up publishing a 2-part story about Alma's case in the March and April 1930 issues. The article was titled "The Crime Kentucky Can't Forget." In 1934, though, things would change drastically because Frank Fair, on the behalf of Alma's direct family, stated that he was going to withdraw his opposition for Joseph to be paroled. It is said that Frank Fair actually had an 18-page letter that Joseph had written in his handwriting, and it was proven to be his, where he admitted to being an accessory to Alma's murder. This letter was never made public still to this day, but Frank stated that if Joseph admitted he was responsible for the murder and would immediately, upon being released, go back to France, then the family would be okay with him no longer being behind bars for the crime. The family simply wanted him to admit it at this point. Joseph had been behind bars for 23 years at this point. He just wanted to be a free man, so he went along with it. And he said that he was the one who killed Alma Kellner. But his confession, it was not full of remorse. It didn't seem like he had his breaking point and wanted the family to know what he had done. He just wanted to be done with this entire situation and be back in France. The trip was to New York and then to Europe, and it was paid for out of Joseph's own money he made at the prison. So the state of Kentucky had to pay for nothing when it came to sending him back to France. Police Chief Lindsay, then a sheriff, and 3 deputies were in charge of him at this time because he was still considered a prisoner until he was handed to immigration in New York to start his voyage by boat. During his stopover in Louisville, he saw his ex-wife, her brother, and her nephew, and some of his friends. Lena was 75 at this time and had stood behind him for all of these years. Law forbid anyone to stay legally married to someone who was a convict for life, so they did get a divorce, but I'm sure if it was allowed, she would have stayed married to him for all of those years. When he made it to New York, he stayed at the Victoria Hotel and stayed a few nights there, and during the day, accompanied by the warden and 2 Kentucky police officers, was basically allowed to just walk around New York and enjoy his last bit of time in the United States, however he legally chose to do so. Joseph and the warden shared a room at the hotel, and he told the warden that he had had no contact since he came to America with his parents back in France, and if they were still alive, he would probably join them on the family farm, and if they were not alive, then he would most likely just inherit the farm and live on it and spend the rest of his days there. The day he boarded the ship heading overseas was February 2nd of 1935, a day which he stated was his 50th birthday, even though he was actually, based on records, 62. French magazines and newspapers would highlight the story, and it was definitely painted in a way where there was complete sympathy for Joseph, that he was a poor Frenchman who went to America for a better life, was devoted to his wife, and was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, and served a long period of time behind bars for a crime that he did not commit. And then while he was in prison, he was nothing but a model prisoner. It was very biased. Most people in France didn't see the information from the courtroom and in the American papers, so they pretty much all sided with Joseph. He lived out his life freely, viewed as a hero, until the day that he died. Little is known about his life after he returned to France. I personally could not even find the information regarding his death and what year he passed away in. Back to who is really important in this case though, Alma Kellner. She was laid to rest in St. Louis Cemetery in Louisville. Her sister Minnie would be laid to rest beside her in 1917 when she passed away at the age of 17 from heart disease. This was another tragedy that struck the Kellner family. A year after Alma's murder, the family did welcome a baby boy that they would name Frank Fair Kellner. Alma's father passed in 1942 and her mother passed in 1961. Her brother Frederick passed in 1967 and her brother Frank passed in 1987. In this photo taken by Shawn M. Herron, you can see Alma and Minnie's graves in the back, and in the front are her brothers and her parents' graves. As for others in the case, Captain Carney passed in 1927, Chief Lindsay passed in 1943, and Father Schumann passed in 1931. Now, due to pretty much all of the evidence against Joseph Wendling being circumstantial and the letter Frank Fair possessed never being made public, people have questioned whether Joseph really was the one responsible for Alma's murder. There is really only one other person looked at as possibly having some involvement, but again, it isn't based on physical evidence. On the night of September 2nd of 1913, a Catholic priest in New York named Father Hans B. Schmidt murdered his wife, Anna. He slit her throat and cut her body into 9 pieces, and her remains were found in the East River in New York City. He fully confessed to the crime and stated he was commanded by patron saint, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, to sacrifice his wife of 6 months. Well, it was discovered that Father Schmidt, originally from Germany, was staying in Louisville with Father Henry B. Westerman, the pastor for the Church of Immaculate Conception, from mid-1909 to April of 1910. His reasoning for being there was he had been sent there to improve his English so he could take on a more active role as a priest in the United States. During the time behind bars before his trial, when he was confessing his guilt for things that he did in life, he stated that if he could convince the Louisville authorities that he was guilty for Alma's murder and save the innocent janitor, that he would do so. Later, though, he took back this slight confession and stated that if he had been responsible, he would admit it. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to him professing insanity. Many quote-unquote insanity experts were put on the case. His next trial ended in him being found guilty and sentenced to death. He was executed at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York on February 18th of 1916 by the electric chair. To this day, he is the only priest in the United States that has ever been executed for murder. Before his death, he did deny any guilt when it came to Alma Kellner's murder. So that is all of the information that I have for you today regarding the case of Alma Kellner. And again, if you do want to learn more about this case, I highly recommend checking out these two books right here. I will have them linked down below in the description of this video. There is really a lot when it comes to this case, but I felt like I just wanted to go over the main facts and anything else that I found of importance. But thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about this case. To this day, people that freshly look into the murder of Alma Kellner sometimes are not completely convinced when it comes to Joseph Wendling's guilt. I'm genuinely curious to see what you all have to say about it, if some of you think that maybe it was possibly someone else who just fell under the radar. There have been so many cases that I've followed for years, and I was dead set on one person. I'm like, they have to be responsible. Like, there's so much that points to them. And then it's solved, and DNA proves that it wasn't. And I'm just bewildered by it. You really just never know. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day. I hope you all have been enjoying October. I know I have. I feel like this month just makes my spooky soul come alive. As soon as I see the first orange leaf hit the ground, my serotonin levels go up. But with all of that being said, I will see you all in the next one.